Hello, welcome to Singapore Geospatial Week Plus 2020, an event organized by GeoWorks, Singapore Land Authority's Geospatial Industry Centre. So today we are excited to have Unmanned Systems Asia panel to share on the development of AV in the Asia market. So we have speakers from Desay, SV Automotive, Frost and Sullivan, and ST Engineering Land Systems. So the moderator for this panel will be Dan from SIT. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please leave them in the Q&A box and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. So thank you, and without further ado, I will pass it over to Dan. Dan, please.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel discussion for the development of AV in the Asia market. First of all, the AV market has been projected with more than $2 billion by 2020, with a compounded annual growth rate, CAGR, of 60.1% from 2019 from a mere 1.14 billion. Now, this potential growth has led to many interested companies, regardless whether they are from the automotive domain or not, to jump into the bandwagon for investing into AV development. However, AV is not an arm's length in comparison to the development of a typical in-combustion engine vehicle. And the recent development of camera and LiDAR has helped to propel this automation of AV, but the recent accidents in testing has brought out new concerns such as safety, privacy, and readiness of digital infrastructure, plus user acceptance. The good thing is Singapore has recently secured a top spot for automotive or autonomous vehicle readiness index globally in 2020. And we will cover some of these aspects during our discussion, and also the impact of COVID-19 to the Asian markets such as Japan, South Korea, and China, who are top of the 20 list as well. Now, most importantly, we will also discuss if these topics are ready for the market and are the market ready for them. Let's welcome our three panelists from joining today's discussion. The first panelist is Mr. Azmoon Ahmad. Mr. Azmoon is a member of the executive board at Desay SV, Automotive Vijay, China. He is responsible for the international business development and division connected services. He also oversees the Central Technology Unit, which is a central pillar of the company Advanced Technology Development Operation. He has pursued his career from R&D to business development and has managed international R&D and business teams at various global locations, as well as serving global customers across continents. Yeah, maybe Azmoon, you would like to say a few hi? Yeah, just a wave. Okay, while waiting for the camera to be on, let's introduce the second panelist, Mr. Vijay Rao. Mr. Vijay is a Senior Research Director within the APAC Automotive Practice at Frost & Sullivan, Australia. Vijay has more than 15 years of experience working across different automotive domain areas such as powertrain, chassis, safety, aftermarket, autonomous, and connected vehicles. His main specialization includes tracking and monitoring across hybrid EVs in APAC and global market. Vijay has also worked on technical projects across different clients in APAC and globally that include technology roadmaps, product planning, supply chain, customer research, part pricing, market entry, and product diversification strategy. Yeah, Vijay, you would like to say hi?
Yes, hi everyone.
Hi,
yes,
hi. And lastly, our third panelist is Mr. Yeen Teck. So Mr. Yeen Teck is the head of autonomous transport at ST Engineering. And ST Engineering has been involved in AV platforms for nearly 20 years and has been behind numerous AV trials and deployment in Singapore and overseas. Most notably, Asia first AV trials that's open to the public in 2019, if you can remember the Sentosa trial. So once again, thank you for spending a precious time with us today. Now, before we start our discussion about the market segment and regional challenges for AV, let's start with understanding how is the current landscape of AV development and what are the existing challenges to deliver AV as a business? Maybe if I could divert this question to Yeen Teck.
Hi, I'm wondering if you can hear me, Dan?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So the question that you have, Dan, is a very interesting one. We have actually globally around the world, you've seen development in terms of autonomous technologies, both at the passenger vehicle level and also at the larger platforms, proceeding at a pretty furious pace. And you've already seen multiple trials, both public and private, in multiple cities around the world. So in terms of, but despite all the advances that were made so far, there are still always challenges that we have to overcome. Many of them are still technical. For instance, you're talking about the ability to do computation and to be able to miniaturize a lot of the requirements so that they can fit onto a vehicle on a very sustainable basis. Beyond that, there are also, beyond the platform, there are also challenges that you'd have in terms of placing the AV within the environment. So AVs are essentially robots, computers with wheels that move around. They detect, they localize, and then they navigate. They have to figure their way around in the world. And in many cases, on roads. So you have to, the gold standard is, of course, to be able to share them with other road users. Ideally, in the future, you'd see only autonomous vehicles. But in the meantime, between now and then, a lot of the work has to be about how you manage the space, both within the vehicle, but also in conjunction with other vehicles, and usually driven by people. The challenges are technical, but also in terms of well, actually multiple, there are multiple arenas. First one is the technological issue, which a lot of focus has understandably been placed, but there are also operational challenges. Public acceptance is really one of the biggest challenges that companies that are looking at AV have to overcome. You have to be able to convince the public that a robot drives not just as well as any other human, but in fact far better. The threshold for acceptance for an autonomous vehicle is very, very high, and understandably so, because you'd hardly see any AVs around on the streets. So despite having on a per kilometer basis a much higher safety rate currently than even for human manned vehicles, one single incident typically will cast a very long shadow across the entire ecosystem for AVs. Just for instance, a fatal incident involving an Uber vehicle in Arizona 2 years ago has essentially rolled back a lot of the trials for many companies in the US. In Singapore, I think with this public trial that we had last year, where members of the public were able to come in and sit on a bus without any of the usual waivers and indemnities. Safety and reliability was really the very, very topmost of our concern, and you really have to take care to make sure that the perception of the public when riding the bus is maintained, and that people understand what experience they'd like to have. This is really about setting a base case for the public. Over time, you'd see that the challenges will come in terms of being able to overcome or being able to adjust to existing regulations, which were designed for human drivers. And then finally, to be able to look at building a sustainable business with autonomous vehicles. At this point in the state of the art, a fully equipped self-driving bus is going to cost much, much more than an equivalent manned bus. It's the same with a passenger vehicle. Much of it is to do with the cost of the sensors, the computers, whereas if you have a human, is from an operating perspective, it's almost much cheaper. And while we've seen fairly dramatic decreases in costs over time, they are not quite yet at the level where you say that if you take a vehicle and an equivalent, an autonomous vehicle and an equivalent manned vehicle, you'd achieve the same kind of price parity. So there are challenges still, and I would say that we are still some way to go before we are able to realize autonomous transport, whether it's on a personal passenger basis or whether it's in terms of public transit. But it will come, and it's really about being able to navigate all these different challenges all at the same time and arriving at incremental steps of demonstrating the technology, demonstrating the ability to satisfy public acceptance, and then finally demonstrating that there are multiple business cases in different users.
Totally agree. I think one of the key aspects, really, the safety has been one of the core topics for many work groups, trying to talk about safety relevant infrastructure and content within the AV, and how to make sure that we do really meet the aim of reducing traffic accidents. And any other inputs from the other panelists, especially to Azmoon as well, who has a R&D center in Singapore and also an innovation center to talk about the development of AV. Yeah, Azmoon?
Dan, thank you very much for this. First, of course, I try to share as much as I can, but for Desay Automotive, we are very much involved in the Chinese automotive market. And I think, as you know, that currently the automotive market in the world, China being the #1 driving force, with over 28 million passenger cars and buses and commercial vehicles production in a year, we expect that the AV or driverless car in China will grow further. Indeed, the new technology, autonomous vehicle, is taking a lot of discussion in the automotive industry. And in fact, if you visit the CES every year since the last 3 years, it's always been dominated by automotive related and component related exhibitions, right? So in China, I think I will talk a lot more about the China because that's where I'm very much involved. Though there are activities in Singapore, we do R&D work for the autonomous vehicle driving technology, but I will just focus in China.
Okay.
Then if you may allow me, I would like just to share with you a slide, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, we'll come to the second questions and then we can come
okay.
there. The time will come.
Well, for the Chinese market, I think, as you know, the Chinese government has been very instrumental and the driving force behind the development of autonomous vehicle. Yeah, from a level 1 to level 2, you find that today almost 30% of the passenger cars in China production today, almost 30% or even above, has already equipped with level 1 and level 2 components, yeah, for autonomous driving. This includes cruise control, automatic emergency braking, surround view, even automatic parking. Not to mention the least, there are other features like lane keeping, lane changing, what do you call it? Then we have
ADAS, yeah.
and ADAS and also more. So there are much more actually. And more importantly, you find that the Chinese players are growing very fast, like the NIO, Li Auto, XPeng, which Desay Automotive is very much involved with XPeng. If you look at XPeng, which has just launched their vehicles in the market, we are one of the suppliers. No, we are the only suppliers for hardware for the autonomous driving. So that part, I think we are very much involved. More to say, I think the Chinese government will continue to push this ahead. What happened is that in China, with the advent of the 5G, they put them in tandem, the autonomous vehicle and the 5G technology, and they will come together and they will make the car intelligent so much so that with these two being coupled together, they make the driving much more intelligent, right? And of course, there are many activities going on with the 5G. So the connectivity and the intelligence of the car, they will be coming in pairs within the automotive market in China. So having said that, for me, the autonomous vehicle in China will grow much faster than any other region, in my opinion. Also because there is a very clear mandate given by the government to the automotive industry. This is the direction they would like to go into. Apart from EV, electric vehicle, autonomous vehicle will be the next thing in China that will come and push through. And then back to you.
Okay. And yeah, in terms of like what Azmoon has mentioned, I think the market now generically like to segregate in terms of business sense, in terms of connected vehicle, and sometimes they call this as SAE 3 level and SAE 4. I think nobody has mentioned of SAE level 5. Just to provide some information to our audience, when we say SAE level 0 to all the way to SAE level 5 is the level of autonomy. The SAE level 5 being the highest automation of vehicles, but we have yet have seen any OEMs able to commit to that. Most of them are going to connected vehicles, ADAS level 3 and to level 4.
Yeah.
And in that view, and also part of the landscape of AV development, Mr. Vijay, would you have any impression of how the current landscape of this AV could deliver AV as a business in the view of, especially your resided in Australia and out Singapore?
Yeah. So just quickly to add on what Mr. Yeen and Mr. Azmoon mentioned. So even I agree with the fact that it will go at a stepped level rather than going directly to level 5. So as we can see, as Azmoon clearly mentioned, we are at ADAS level 1 and level 2 currently, with most of the vehicles well equipped to take that. And that market will definitely grow. And what we also mention here is CASE, which is connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. So these are the 4 trends that we see in the automotive industry currently, and all these 4 are interconnected. And we do see this as a big market landscape happening with different OEMs, suppliers working across these 4 different industries and interconnecting each one. So what we also put a bold statement is that in the future, 100% electric vehicles will be autonomous. So what we are saying is all electric vehicles will be autonomous going forward because of the technology. They already have a high voltage wiring harness. They have a different sensors. They have different cameras already equipped with them. And they're also, easy to drive around. So low emissions. So that is the reason when Frost & Sullivan did any report, we usually say that the future of autonomous has to be entirely dependent on the future of electric vehicle. And that's one of the reasons why China will be the biggest market, because China is way ahead in terms of electric vehicle market. They are given a lot of subsidies from the local government. A lot of local manufacturers are coming up with a lot of new technology. And I think that is where the business landscape is moving from China. Then we see the biggest market overall being US, followed by Europe. And that's the kind of market we currently see.
Okay, so I think we have sort of addressed some of these topics already. So I think in terms of technology, we all agree that not one single supplier can actually create the functionality of AV, and therefore you need an ecosystem of different partners. That's also one of the reasons why even in the local Singapore government, you see that there is such a call called CFC, call for collaborations, where you in fact need a ecosystem to drive the operation of an AV. Well, we'll come to that question later. But since we are talking about market segment, and Azmoon has already mentioned about the importance of China, so what do you think are the market segments, of course, including China and regions, that are already for this user acceptance of buying of AV? And is there areas that we could do more? And maybe this is the best time that Azmoon could share his beautiful slides about China and maybe about his experience with us, especially with the recent news that, companies like Tencent and the rest, which are AV supporters in China, they are trying to stay a foothold in Singapore. Yeah, Azmoon?
Then thank you very much. So I shall share my screen, if it's okay with you, Ben.
Yep, go ahead.
Where do I, okay. Then can you see my screen now?
Yes.
So then this is a very interesting screen, just a simple overview. Looking from the left side, you find that it's blue colored information. The light blue is level 2, the slightly dark blue is level 3, and the darkest blue is level 4, level 5. These are based on quantities. These are figures which we got from Deloitte, and there's a number of vehicles. You find that the number 27% is a CAGR, that is the compounded annual growth rate. In 2020, this number from Deloitte is about 1 million. Of the 1 million, 0.9 million having at level 1 million is level 2, 0.9 is level 3, and only 0.1 million is level 4, level 5 in China. But if you look at the number has grown up to 10.8 million, 10 times from 2020 to 2030. This is like a prognosis, yeah? So that means to say that you can see that the level 2, about 10 million, which we expect 30 million passenger cars in 2030, is about 30%. This is very conservative, and the expectation is that the AV market or ADAS market in China has a high potential. And on the right side are values. That's coming to about $9.2 billion US by 2030. So having said that, which means to say that there's a lot of companies are jumping into the wagon and trying to offer solutions in autonomous vehicle, including the CSV automotive, and which we are already in. Yeah, and we are very much already in level 2, and we are moving slowly towards level 3, at least by 2022, by 2023, and be ready enough for 2025. So China market still remains one of the most interesting market for DCSV automotive. That does not mean that we are not interested to be out of the other part of the world. We do. But we see that the Chinese automotive market is by far the most aggressive, the most enthusiastic, and also the most driven. And the hunger to go into this area is much, much more the way we see it. Perhaps because they are less conservative like other regions and other markets, which is more mature, and the Chinese population also is very adventurous to try on new technologies. And if you find that technologies in China is much more being picked up by the public and by the consumers in many ways, including mobiles and mobile phones, automotive, and so on and so forth, Jen. So this is where for DCS automotive, we are very much involved in this. And we believe that this is the main thrust of the automotive industry in the coming decade, in our opinion. Okay, Dan?
Yep. Thank you, Azmoon. And anything to add on from Intech from ST Engineering? Do you see something similar in the China market or in the Asia market, that the market segments or regions are really ready for the buy-in of AV, or are they having a separate thoughts? Especially with countries like South Korea, Japan, or even in China itself?
Well, we don't have a specific presence in China, although we have been working with several Chinese partners to look at deployments of autonomous vehicles. So I wouldn't have as much of an insight as Azmoon. But yes, we do see that there is generally interest that stretches across the multiple countries. So where you have one country having a specific deployment operation or a company that has there's invariably interest from other countries about how you might want to cross deploy or to have some kind of partnership. And this is quite interesting because you see that a lot is quite fertile. There's a lot of cross sharing of information and ideas of how you might want to deploy and how you might want to operationalize. Sure. And it really depends on the specific type of market, even within the country.
And I think in like for the case of Japan, they were trying to use that for their Olympics for 2020. Unfortunately, their Olympics was delayed by 1 year, so they got to do it for the next. And I think same being said, Beijing is going to do it the same for the winter 2020, using AV as a form of showing their capability. I think these are also the different use case. There are also use case where people are starting to use AV as a technology to ferry the COVID-19 patients so that they are isolated from the rest. So that being said, the figures that we just saw from Azmoon, and also we have seen a lot of reports from research companies. One of the questions that most people will always have, is this a real representation of the current and future business opportunity of AV in the Asia region? We have seen such representation for EVs as well, but sometimes they do not come as forecast. So any key considerations that we should do here while we are all partners and creators and making AV happens? So any key considerations that we need to take or consider in order to be successful and meet this representation of current and future business opportunity? Maybe I can have Vijay to answer that.
Sure. So in terms of business opportunity, there are definitely a lot of business opportunity for AV it has to go step by step in terms of business opportunity. And we do see a lot of importance for autonomous vehicles. So what I'll be doing is I'll share a slide of what are the business opportunity for autonomous vehicles in this particular space. So in our research, we have classified this as 4 important opportunities for autonomous vehicles. One is mobility services, the second is logistics, third is peripheral services, and the last one is vehicle services. So when we talk about mobility services, we are basically talking of autonomous taxis, like robo taxis coming from Tesla, autonomy working in Singapore along with Uber. So these are some of the future opportunities that the companies are looking for. It's not only automotive companies, but non-automotive companies, like the technology companies that we are looking at. Also, we have looked at autonomous shuttles. I think LTA is doing a lot of work in the saved environment, which will be used for a lot of, as we mentioned about in Olympic Games, Winter Games. So this will be another opportunity for moving people from one place to another and other cases. Another interesting thing, what we are seeing, and there is a lot of competition going on, is in terms of logistics services. So when we see people talk about Jeff Bezos of Amazon or Elon Musk of Tesla, they are really fighting it out in this particular market where they want to have autonomous last mile delivery, and they want to build their own platforms, their own products, and sell it in the market. So they don't need to rely on any other companies, but they do it in-house. And that's one of the reasons why they've invested quite a bit on these particular sector. And they also have curbside delivery and hub-to-hub goods delivery. The peripheral services are nothing new, but I think autonomous vehicles will play a big role in terms of your user insurance, like how much your vehicle has driven, and that will determine how much insurance you have to pay every year. And also your predictive auto maintenance. When does your vehicle have to be changing tires? When do they have to charge your battery? So all these maintenance effect will happen with this autonomous vehicle, and that will be having a big impact on this business opportunity. And lastly, the vehicle services of how you park your vehicle and what features should be updated over the air, which Tesla is doing in terms of OTA, over the air updates. So these are some of the 4 broad categories that we see in terms of business opportunities for autonomous vehicles. And there is a specific reason why we see this, because when you start looking at the numbers of what we have predicted in the future, so 2019, the revenue of these 4 services was just $1 billion USD globally. And of course, APAC will contribute close to 25 to 30% of the market. But when you look at 2030, it's coming to $202 billion. So that's the kind of opportunity that the companies are looking at. And no wonder a lot of non-automotive technology companies, everyone wants to enter this market. So that shows that a lot of auto companies are falling behind and tech companies are going ahead in this particular space. And when you look at the growth, the mobility services, which I spoke about, autonomous taxis and the shuttles, they will have a growth of 200% in the next 10 years. So that is phenomenal when we look at the business opportunity in this particular case, followed by peripheral. Though peripheral service will be the biggest market because of insurance and all the other facilities, but the growth we see is biggest in the mobility services. So as to conclude, there is a big opportunity in autonomous vehicle services market. And that is one of the reasons why every company is looking at this as one of the key market to grow their revenues.
Okay. So
can I chip in, Jen?
Sure. Azmoon, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, with Vijay's presentation slide, that only makes myself smile even broader, right? There's a high demand for autonomous vehicle. While we at Desay as we automotive, we are not the logistic provider or peripheral service provider, but we do provide the technology itself to automakers, which means to say for Desay as we automotive,
your market is even bigger.
Yeah, that's where the future is, and I think that's where for Desay as automotive, we are really pumping our investment into this area. Not only in Singapore, we are looking globally. We are trying to invest in countries like Japan, where they have the expertise. We are looking into US, where they have the expertise. And for Desay as automotive, looking at the slide of Vijay, we can only say, wow, we are on the right wave. Thank you, Vijay.
I guess this also comes back to a lot of companies in the world are trying to master the whole transport arena. That means whether it's the logistics, whether I want to have the first mile and the last mile to have connected services, and therefore the new trend of having this mobility as a service that's coming up. So like whatever Vijay has presented, the potential actually comes in not only the traditional automotive AV of transportation, but it also comes in the logistic services and other last mile opportunities as well. So this really sums up and brings the value to the total more than 200 billion over by 2030, which we have will talk about. And maybe I don't know if Intech have anything to add on with his trial in Sentosa. Does that bring up new opportunity or business that maybe most Singaporeans have not seen, and he would like to chip in? I'm sure you have gathered and garnered a lot of user experience also and feedback on those months, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Dan. So for the participants who weren't aware, we had a first public trial in Singapore of an autonomous bus. It was a mini bus, so it seats about 20 persons. Although, of course, for safety reasons, we limited it to a smaller group, about 10 to 15, depending on the day. But so it was held on Sentosa, which is an island off Singapore, where it's mostly tourist in nature, and if you can download an app, you can press the call button, the bus comes and it brings you along a predetermined route to several stations. And we ran it for about 4 months, and we had pretty good ridership during that period, and public acceptance was actually quite good. Actually, the vast majority of the people who rode in the buses were quite surprised at how it felt and how natural it felt compared to, say, a human-driven bus. And that was very encouraging for us. And of course, with that trial, we saw a lot of interest from other countries to have us to do similar trials with them across various municipalities, townships. And this is something that we are working out at this moment. The thing is, we see that there is growth similar to what Vijay has expressed from a top-down perspective. We see that kind of interest in growth from a bottom-up perspective, because we are the ones who are looking at, we're seeing the actual interest. But it's also at the same time not a very even type of growth, meaning that we don't see that kind of interest across all classes of autonomous vehicles, or all across all types of scenarios. And the simple reason is that the technology and the acceptance is at various levels for various types of use cases. And one of the key issues that from a deployment or from an operating perspective is to identify these use cases. Of course, for suppliers, OEM automotive suppliers like Desay, they will be selling to all sorts of vehicles, all sorts of customers, and it's definitely going to be an increase in demand, and it's really up to the AV companies that are actually trying to do the deployments to figure out whether the use cases are in the immediate term, in the near future, and also in the long term. And the thing is, for many people, the idea of an autonomous vehicle is very much a replacement of a manned service, meaning you see an existing service, you replace a human with a computer. But that's not really the case, because what happens is there's an entire ecosystem that will have to change as you have more AVs coming into the scene. The way AVs will be deployed will be quite different from how we are experiencing them today. Even the people who are operating vehicles right now, so whether it's a taxi driver or a bus driver, many of these roles are not going to go away, but they will change and they will require different skill sets. So there'll always be requirements for people. The question and the challenge, of course, is to figure out what roles will come in, and this is something that is an ongoing thing, and it will go on for a very, very long time.
I totally agree with you. So I think one of the topics that we talk about is really the supporting and the enhancing technology. I think earlier on, Azmoon was also saying about 5G and 4G support. And then we are talking about peripheral services other than the OEM. And with the test trial that the ST have done in Sentosa, and Intake mentioned the important word, the ecosystem. I think this was also one of the reasons why a lot of ecosystem has come up in terms of supporting this AV technology. And one of the reasons why South Korea and Japan on top of the AV readiness list was because of the availability of coverage of 4G and upcoming of 5G and V2X, where Singapore is also doing the same. So now with that in mind and with this ecosystem in mind, I think it's important also to ask the panelists what kind of success have you experienced so far, because all of these AV experiments require not only company-based information, infrastructure and platform, but you do require a lot of governmental organization information like LTA, public roads, public infrastructure, traffic lights, and you need to have new regulations for the AV as well. You need to dynamically meet them as well. So to the panelists, so what are the success that you have experienced so far with these new regulations and gathering of public information with the governmental sectors? And is there any potential pitfalls that we should avoid in order to make AV deployment a success? These questions, let me start with Azmoon, and later we can go to Yeen and of course Vijay as well. Azmoon, yeah.
Okay, then you asked a question with regard to laws and regulations.
Yeah, and well, you are NMP before, so you will be my first choice to go for.
Well, then I think for every new technology that being put into the market, not only about cars, but even when you talk about other machines, we always worried about safety part of it. Yeah, what happens when it works, and what happens if that leads to a situation where it can be fatal, right? Especially when it comes to automotive. I mean, who would like to sit in a vehicle where there's no driver in front and manning the vehicle? I think there's going to be a big shock for anyone. But I guess as a matter of time, but having said that, yes, I was involved in some discussion within the legal circles, and they are working on it. And like any other country in the world, I think Singapore has started, but you know, it's not an easy feat then, because this is a new space, and having a new space, we can only envisage and guess and try our very best to circumvent all the extreme situations that we can be confronted with. For example, would you allow a car to be driven autonomously or driverless, and what happens if there's an accident happen on the way, right? Who will be at fault? Who will be responsible, and so on and so forth? And it's not an easy, it's an easy question, but I don't think there will be an easy answer, right? So I know the legal fraternity is looking into this aspect. They are trying to find out with regulations. They are trying to learn from Japan. They are trying to learn from the US. They are trying to learn from Europe. But all in all, I think at the end of the day, to a certain extent, you can as much as possible circumvent all this. But I don't think it will be 100%. As you go along the way, there'll be trial and errors. There'll be some accidents in between, but hopefully it's not fatal. And as we go along, there will be a pendulum between the automotive industry and the regulators. There will always be pendulum from swinging from one to the other. One will compromise on certain aspect, and the other will improve on certain aspect. That's what I will foresee. How long this will last, I don't know, maybe 3 years to 5 years from now, we could reach maybe a level where we are comfortable. I'm not saying it's complete, but comfortable enough for us to accept the fact that, yes, we will have autonomous vehicle on the road. Not to forget, having said that, the infrastructure has also to be upgraded, right? Of course, as time goes on, the technology gets sharper and get more accurate. You find signals and signs may not be as important as today. Maybe in the future with radar, LIDAR, and even new technologies come on board, maybe with satellite services, connected services, I mean the car will, or the vehicle will have more information just depending on the road signs. I think recently Singapore has just announced that ERP will be taken away. They will be based on
P2.
right? And so on and so forth. These are examples. So I think for autonomous vehicle industry, the regulators will not only be doing on their part, but there will also be a part where the automakers has to improve the technologies, right? And if we assume if both sides play their role well, so there'll be a convergence where one will improve and one will relax a little bit, so much so that it becomes acceptable. And that's what I will see will happen in the coming years. Yeah, and hopefully it's faster than we can think of. Some people say it's 2030, some may say it's 2025.
Yeah.
But whether 2025 is the right answer or 2030 is the right answer, I think the answer was somewhere in between, depending again on whether the government of the day and the population of the day can accept, because it will depend on location to location. Maybe in China, they are more enthusiastic, they are more explorative, and hence they are willing to take more risk. But in certain regions and countries where they are more mature, but yet they are conservative, and maybe they take a longer time. So I guess this again will depend on region to region or location to location. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I think one of the reasons why Singapore is in the top spot mainly is because of the infrastructure readiness and also the governmental support. I think with the launch of more test trials, hopefully that's because of the Sentosa success. So now the whole western side of a trial can be done for autonomous vehicle. But yet Singapore has also installed Citran to do the cross validation between of all the AVs for Singapore trial before you can drive an AV on public roads. And of course, these are steps and the reasons why Singapore secured the top spot. But I think there's still many steps to be moving forward. And maybe with some experience of Citran validation and testing of AV, I don't know if Yeen can give some experience that he has experienced before with vehicles of AV testing and validations in these aspects. And what are the success that you can share?
Well, this is obviously an evolving space. Sometimes it almost feels like we are trying to develop the standards and the rules as we go along. Especially in AV, where very much it's very much an untested area. We do know where in terms of human-based, human-driven transport, what the standards are and what the expectations are. But when it comes to machine-driven vehicles, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, we are not so clear yet. And I have to say, Dan, you pointed out that Singapore is sitting very high up on the AV readiness index. Many readiness indices, the most recent one that was published was by KPMG, which puts Singapore at the top. And a lot of it was attributed, like you said, to government willingness to experiment and to allow companies to test and to develop solutions. And to be honest, without that kind of willingness, we won't make much headway. I saw a comment, by the way, from one of the participants asking about India. India is in that KPMG readiness index. I think they were ranked 29 in that list. So some ways to go, but certainly it's supposed to be a descriptor of the readiness across the entire country. But if you were to look at specific use cases, there probably might be cases where there's a lot more acceptance at the time. The big issue I think we will face is really about being able to figure out the rules in a very sustainable way. In Singapore we have Citran as an independent testing circuit, but at the same time there are also certain constraints. Singapore being a very small country, there's only so much you can do in terms of testing and development, and whether you're able to port it over to the rest of the world. Certainly there are other countries or companies in other countries who are trying to come to Singapore because of the very because of the convenience and also the support that they see from the government in terms of AV development. And this is a really good sign because that means that you are able to create a development ecosystem, not just an operational ecosystem, but a development ecosystem to be able to then take that learning, take that experience, and to share it with other countries and other cities in the world.
I think one of the challenge that you have brought up is precisely, I think the standardization or the validation actually just a reason for the couple 1 or 2 years ago. I still remember that Sichuan was just started not more than 3. And in fact, along the way, we have started new standardization at TR68 for autonomous reference. So I think exactly what you have mentioned in Teck, we are going along and we are also modifying and improving, as also what Azmoon has mentioned. So being that, I think one of the hardest is actually, Azmoon has mentioned this earlier on, was the balance, yeah? The balance within how much information can we take from the OEMs and how much information that the government wants in case of safety accidents or things were to happen. So I think this also draws the importance of ecosystem being to provide sufficient information to establish this. And one of the most interesting question, I guess a lot of the attendees or viewers are waiting for, and I leave this interesting question to Vijay so that he doesn't become too quiet, and I'm just joking. So we all know that HMC is going to come to Singapore to invest. I think the biggest question. They has also committed a production plant and also an innovation center, which hypes up a lot of people, especially in the automotive domain. The last time where we have a successful vehicle plant was 40 years ago with Ford, yeah. The next one that was close to building an EV was actually Dyson, but they pulled out just beginning of this year. So Vijay, the golden question, how will we make sure that HMC will be here and will be staying?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think that is where most of the Singaporeans are looking forward to, especially when they have manufacturing back to Singapore again. So from what we understand, electric vehicle is the basis for any future autonomous vehicles, as I was mentioning. And like what I mentioned, most of the autonomous vehicles, Singapore is rated very high in terms of the index, in terms of AV index. So I think Hyundai has made a very smart move in the sense that they understand that Singapore will be the perfect test bed for autonomous vehicles. And the basis for that is electric vehicles. And that is one of the reasons that they have set up a plant in Singapore. I think they will manufacture approximately 30,000. That's the production capacity they want to have initially. Obviously, they can't sell everything within Singapore. So it has to be going outside to ASEAN and other regions outside ASEAN for it to really have a big business case. And also they are setting up the innovation hub, making sure that a lot of R&D happens in Singapore, a lot of testing happens within Singapore. And that is, I think, one of the key reasons. Also, as you know, Hyundai is very pushing forward in terms of their green vehicles, not only electric vehicles, but in the future also fuel cell vehicles. So this will play a very important role because they have realized that Singapore can act as a perfect test bed in terms of testing their vehicles and also at the future export. So what is typically happening is one pitfall that we were all discussing is the legal regulations, where there is a lot of issue whether who will take the responsibility when an accident happens. So that was one of the reasons why the OEMs are very, I would say, very skeptical to test their cars anywhere outside their home country, because then there'll be a lot of legal implications. We saw that happening with Tesla when a person had a level 5 autonomous, I would say level 4 autonomy 5 driving, and when it crashed, so no one was able to take the responsibility. Tesla passed on it to a supplier. The infrastructure person said that the signals were working properly. So finally, the supplier had to take the responsibility of this malfunctioning of a particular system. So this is where the big challenge comes. And that is why OEMs are a bit skeptical to test these kind of autonomous vehicles anywhere outside their home country to make sure that they are very safe. So Singapore will act as a perfect test bed for Hyundai because the government is laying out a lot of test bed opportunities. They are laying out a good regulations that they can work with. They are providing them good facilities. They already have 5G infrastructure. The technology is almost ready in some cases. And that is why it was a perfect match for Hyundai to look at Singapore, because in fact, they're also looking at Indonesia as another market, but not for EV, but for a general IC vehicle production. So for Singapore, they're specifically looking at electric vehicles because they know that will act as a starting point for them for future electric or future autonomous vehicles in the lineup.
I guess for me, one of the reasons why EV is so hardly tagged along with AEV is because if you want a vehicle to be driven autonomous, it has to be electrically charged. Otherwise, in the end, you still have to find somebody to pump fuel into the vehicle. That for me, at least, it makes sense. So that was the reason, I guess, why HMC could be a topic for autonomous vehicle. Anyway, they are also aggressively doing that. So what about the Azmoon and Intake? Do you see the same way about HMC being in Singapore? Would that be a value add, or would that actually be another spike of interest and eventually it may go away?
Then maybe perhaps I take first before Intake is okay?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So then when we talk about autonomous vehicle, I think the vehicle has to be intelligent, yeah? Because it has to replace the human being, hopefully, not at level 5, but at least at level 4. It has to make decisions and decision based on sensories that it has in a car. And more importantly, also we expect the vehicle to be able to judge or make decisions like a human being. That's where we talk about AI, machine learning, deep learning. I think for this aspect, that's also the main reason why also Desay SV Automotive decided to place the advanced development for autonomous vehicle technologies in Singapore. We see that Singapore, not only as legislation, but also from the capability to deliver, to produce also engineers from the universities, whether from NUS or NTU, a high caliber workforce to be able to provide this machine learning and deep learning capabilities. Singapore also has the capability. So, yeah, and I'm not surprised why Singapore was chosen also by HMC. And that's also the reason why also I believe that based on this aspect, Singapore is much more touted as the R&D hub within the region, right? And being as new technology, I think Singapore, as Vijay has mentioned, we have the legislation put in place as much as we can, together with the capabilities of its workforce to be able to go into deep learning and machine learning and AI. I think all this comes together. It's not just one aspect, but both the human aspect and the ecosystem aspect, right?
Yep.
So this is where the HMC sees Singapore as an attractive location.
Good. Anything you want to add on?
Yeah, well, perhaps the only thing I can say is that, you know, the main reason for Singapore's success is its openness to other countries and especially to high value add industries. And to the extent that HMC comes in to Singapore to bring in R&D, to bring in manufacturing, high technology manufacturing, it's a net plus. And it helps also once you have a certain size of requirements on R&D, size of requirements on engineering, in development, in manufacturing, you will see a much more vibrant ecosystem. And this can only be good, not just for ST Engineering, where we are a homegrown company, but we also have ambitions to fight in the world. But also for everyone who wants to participate in autonomous technology. So I think the role of the government in setting that tone and allowing research and development in Singapore cannot be understated. It's really important, and especially in areas like AV, we certainly have a place to play on the global stage.
Yeah. I do definitely agree with that. I think for me personally, one of the key interests with respect to Dyson and HMC is that at least HMC has been experienced in producing vehicle. So in terms of risk and investment upfront, it won't be as risky as what Dyson will be facing. So I guess to me, the odds are lesser and they have more thought out through process in terms of deploying a EV plant in Singapore, which makes it much easier and a higher rate of success. So that being said, thanks for all the questions. I have some questions that's coming through the Q&A. Maybe I can tackle a couple of them given with remaining about 3 or 5 minutes. Let's start the first easier one. Yeah, what role can Singapore play in bringing the industry forward technically or in development? Anyone would like to take the answer? What role can Singapore play in bringing the industry forward technically or in development?
Well, I think I'll take that question. In fact,
Thank you, Vijay.
actually, my last response was very much in relation to this. We, on our own in Singapore, we are not going to be big enough to be able to do things by our own. And in fact, it's very much a facilitative process. Very much in terms of welcoming other companies, inviting them to set up their operations, research and development in Singapore, providing the test bed and the special conditions in Singapore. You know, remember we are a tropical country. It's always raining. It's been raining the last few days, and allowing that kind of technical constraints to allow companies to think through and try to overcome. The fact that we are very urban also speaks very well about our ability to facilitate this. AV is predominantly an urban question, although of course with logistics, long distance logistics, there's also a case for AV there. But it's predominantly an urban question, and something that I think the experience that companies have here in Singapore can be transported and imported to other regions and other municipalities.
I think we all agree that, you know, AV, Singapore is a very good test bed center where we have very clear lane markings, yeah. Where compared to other countries, it may be a bit tougher, and that's where why most of the AV players or tester likes to test or technical or develop here in Singapore. I think this is one of good points. Okay, and then moving forward for the other questions, what is the legal implication for liability in terms of autonomous vehicle accidents? Vijay, you have mentioned some portion about liability. Would you like to take that?
Yes. So that's actually a $1 million question. And that's where I was mentioning that, you know, the regulations have to play a very key role. So whenever there is an accident, so there is still no set regulations, at least in some regions, where who will take the responsibility of when an accident happens. So they have to look at whether there was an issue with the technical part of the vehicle, whether the technology didn't work properly, or whether the infrastructure which the vehicle will communicate, vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure, whether that part, whether it is 4G or 5G, whatever infrastructure it is, whether that has malfunctioned somewhere, or whether there was an issue with the driver, whether the driver didn't put the brakes on time, or whether the manufacturer didn't put a driver warning system because of the accident happening. So these are some of the questions that are being asked, and that is where we don't have a set answers of who will take the legal responsibility, especially when there is an accident. And this is one thing which will be holding back some of the OEMs and some of the manufacturers, because even a simple small issue happens, even if a single person loses life, then it will be set back by at least 2 to 5 years, as even Azmoon was mentioning. So this is a very critical part. So they have to play a very important role. And automotive industry is such an industry where they take a lot of precautions. Safety is a top priority. And, we are always considering zero accidents as a final goal for everyone in the industry. So if that is the case, then we can't take some experiments and, put people's lives at risk. And you don't know who will be able to claim for the insurance. So this will be one of the key discussion points going forward, especially when there are key regulations that are likely to come forward.
Good. I think this brings a remnants to me about the trolley problem, where we always have argumentation about in terms of hours, yeah, about the trolley issues, yeah. So let me leave the last question, the slightly more difficult one to Azmoon. Sorry about that. Given that humans are the weakest link in current state of safety in road transport, what are the behavioral nudges required to promote acceptance of AV? Would the elimination of human control transport hasten AV implementation? That means no more human driving.
Then I think for every new technology which is put into the market, whether it's an AV or whether in the past 20 years ago when the first handphones, or even 40 years ago when the first computer were put in the market, there's always this phase where we need the public to be educated, right? they need to learn how to tango with the new technologies. Yeah, I remember when I bought the first computer when I was still in undergraduate. The first thing I placed was a computer in my home, and the first question was from my mom is that, "Are you sure it's safe?" A computer on the table, she asked, "Are you sure it's safe?" Right? So, I mean, this is the same question today we ask, is the AV vehicle safe, right? Well, for me, like I mentioned earlier, that there's going to be a pendulum swing from the consumer, the public, and to the automakers and technologies. And I think as time goes on, we will pendulum from one side to the other side. And one will need to be educated as public and as people like us. And the other one will be the automakers with the technologies, they will have to improve, right? By taking away the human link, does that solve the problem? It's not about taking away one or the other. The question is, we always ask ourselves, whenever we have a technology to put on the market, will it serve its purpose? Will it serve the human needs, right? Even if it serves the human needs or doesn't serve the human needs, that is the biggest question. Once it serves the human needs, and everything will fall into place, right? Now, take for example the autonomous vehicle. And if we have the autonomous car, tomorrow a robo-taxi, if the robo-taxi is not going to serve the human needs, by putting or doesn't put a person there will still be a problem. And that is the biggest question. Will the autonomous vehicle of the future serve the human needs? And that's where I also put into the discussion the combination of the connectivity of the vehicle plus the autonomous vehicle. If the wholesome unit, yeah, is able to serve the human needs, it means it basically makes our life easier. It will in fact make everything less congestion, right? And the human by being into the autonomous vehicle service needs able to do other things just other than driving, and yet it is safe and is connected to the outside world, connected to the web, and so on and so forth. I think that's what's going to happen. I think this is where I believe strongly the automakers will not just put an autonomous vehicle on the road for the sake of autonomous driving, but it's a vehicle which is able to serve the human needs. The question is that what human needs that will be, that's where there will be a convergence between the public and automakers coming together. And I hope there's also the study by Frost and Sullivan, and that's why they have the 4 aspects, the mobility, the peripherals, because at the end of the day, does it serve its needs?
Correct.
Once that is served, is met, then I think that's where the convergence comes into place. That's my answer, yeah?
So rightly you mentioned, I think the purpose of AV is to support the behavior and the use case of mankind. I think rightly what Intake had mentioned earlier also, the use case, yeah? So if the use case is there, and of course the service would make sense. It makes no sense if you were to automate everything, but there is no outcome per se from that.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally I have one question that I can answer. There's one question that talk about when we see the expected growth in this market, did Singapore anticipate the training and education of future manpower for it? Some active education internship may be in partnership between industries such as ST and university. So this question seems to be suited for me. So in SIT, we do have such a degree program. It's called a telematics program. So we even have adults in the range of 30 to 40s joining our full-time degree program in educating themselves in the arena of automotive and also transport. It is our 3rd year, so we do welcome more students as well. So I hope that answered the questions in terms of the growth and market. But of course, if you ask me about the establishment of HMC or Dyson in Singapore, this is not a typical norm. So even if you ask me to predict and to prepare the manpower, is tough. I mean, it's a chicken and egg story. Imagine if you were to educate more than 1,000 students on this, but at the end of the day, the company doesn't come here. That's also another issue. So some of these topics have to go in tandem, and then we would have to see the forecast and react in accordance, right? So that would be the answer to that. So with the time that we have, I already have 5 minutes overrun. I think we more or less have to call the panel to a close. So before I do that, once again, I would like to thank all the viewers of this panel discussion and also our distinguished panelists for giving their views and insights and share their stories for this 1 hour plus. And we have come to the end of this panel discussion. Thank you once again to all. And a last statement from the organizers itself. This panel discussion is jointly presented by JoWorks and Rotorcraft Asia and Unmanned System Asia. Rotorcraft Asia and Unmanned System Asia will be taking place in 2021, presenting the latest mobility innovation across air, sea, land. There'll be more conversation on AV happening at the Intelligent Mobility Summit at the next year's show. So if you want, you can visit www.rea-umsa.com. I repeat that again, www.rea-umsa.com. So once again, thank you for your kind attendance, and I hope you enjoyed our panelist session. And yep, if you see us around, just give us a nudge and a wave. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
panelists. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all panelists and Dan for the insightful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, so thank you all for tuning in to the webinar. Before you leave, please check out our other webinars by scanning the QR code. So thank you, and we look forward to see you again. Thank you.